Hello, hello. Good to see folks rolling in and want to say welcome and really glad you're here with us today. Um, this is uh, the Movement Cafe, and it is one of the cool things that the United Methodist Creation Justice Movement sort of pulls together once a month on the third Wednesday with different topics. And we bring in different people from across Methodism to see what we're up to. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. And coming right up, actually, I want to introduce myself a little bit. I'm Rashenda, and so I will be helping guide us today. If you use the chat to say hello and introduce yourself, and let us know where you are, perhaps where you're serving, what your home church is. Um, the other thing is that we do, this is a safe space. That's a big deal to all of us, that we provide a space where we can feel comfortable asking questions and being in community together. And so just stay respectful. And so that's a really important thing. So we have some wonderful guests to introduce. And before I do that, though, I want to turn it over to Kathy, because Kathy she is just such a rock star in the coordination of United Methodist Creation Justice Movement. And nobody knows it better than she does. And so she's going to introduce what even is that movement? What are we all doing together? Go ahead, Kathy.
Thanks, Rashinda. Really, we all are doing this together, and that's one of the joys of this. But I'm a United Methodist Earthkeeper in the Minnesota Annual Conference and a layperson, and I have the joy of helping convene the Creation Justice Movement. And as many of you know, but I'm so glad always to see new names and new faces. So I would like to just give you a bit of a background. The United Methodist Church does have a long history of working in the creation justice area, and camping, as we'll learn today, is really one of the oldest areas of how we've interacted with nature and with God's good creation. But in recent years, of course, there's been more urgency around issues of climate change, of ecological destruction, and environmental injustices. And so folks had realized there was more that we could do and started to think about how might we do that together. There were a number of creation care summits that were held, and out of that, the Creation Justice Movement emerged as a space for us to connect across all of the different pieces of this institution that we call the United Methodist Church. How that looks is a series of work teams that we've developed over the last few years. There is a strong communications team that helps host things like this communication space, this conversation space, as well as our monthly newsletter and our website, all of which help us share these ideas and help highlight the stories of what's going on out there in our denomination. We also, we have a work team for eco worship. We have another one on advocacy, another that does annual conference organizing work. And so all of those are also spaces to take action together and to ask what more might we do together. I'm really excited to have this issue come up, this area of our church. Almost every annual conference of our United Methodist Church has some form of camping and retreats. I'm looking forward to learning more about that. And as I mentioned, it really is one of the places that we have an opportunity to be in relationship with nature, to heal our understanding with our relationship with creation, and then to go forth and do more together. So looking forward to this conversation, and that we explore what more might we do together and what more might we do in interaction with our camps. So I think that's all I'll say for today, but always welcome for questions or interactions on how the movement is emerging at this time. I'll turn it back to you, Rashinda.
Thank you, Kathy. That's awesome. So I want to just quickly give just a 2-minute introduction of the folks you're going to be hearing from today. And then hopefully I'll remember to pop a few key things into the chat as well. With us is Jessica Gamachet, and she is the first association director for United Methodist Camp and Retreat Ministries, starting in 2019. So in her role, Jessica has shifted the association into, as she would put, turbo mode, helped get many of the initiatives off the ground, and secured and managed a multi-million-dollar grant for ministry projects, and has creatively leveraged the United Methodist Camp and Retreat Ministry resources to move the organization's mission forward. And boy, mission forward, right? There's some great words. And what does that mean in the context of creation justice? Really excited for this conversation today. So you just heard from Kathy Velasquez Eberhardt, as she's just a founding member and lead organizer for the United Methodist Creation Justice Movement, which she has explained, and a longtime creation justice organizer. Bob Downs is with us. He's a retired engineer and biophysicist. And Bob Downs is a general board of Global Ministries Earthkeeper as well. And his home church is in Ohio. With us also is Reverend Dr. Lawrence J., who currently serves as the executive director of the Rolling Ridge Retreat and Conference Center in North Andover, Massachusetts. An ordained American Baptist pastor and trained spiritual director with over 17 years of experience in camping and retreat ministry. Also an adjunct faculty at Merrimack College. So he's done it all: church planter, senior pastor, youth pastor, campus minister, very much engaged with ministry at all levels. Jen Birch is with us, who helps United Methodist Camp and Retreat Ministries to get things done through her role as a director of communications and community engagement. And she holds a master's degree from ILIF, a School of Theology, which I noticed because there's a few West Coasters on this call, but woo, lift it up for the West Coast. And then finally, Reverend Laura Goldenbaum Yang, who is currently serving as the pastor with youth and young adults at St. James United Methodist Church in Greenville, North Carolina. She is an elder in the United Methodist Church and part of the North Carolina Conference Creation Care Committee, which, if you know anything about all these different teams and care committees, you know that North Carolina is doing the work. And she is, in her current appointment, she serves as the assistant director for the faith formation and environmental education at Donnelly Camp and Retreat Center in Arapahoe. So that is our wonderful group of folks with us. And you'll get to meet them more during the conversation, but also in the breakout rooms later on. So I'm going to turn it over again back to Kathy for our nutshell. What are we going to talk about today? Again, what is that? The nexus, the nut, the seed of what we're doing.
Well, we've alluded to it, but it really is that the camping and retreat part of the United Methodist Church is a space for us to explore our relationship with God's good creation, to heal that, to learn, and to go forth to do good work. So I think that's the nutshell, and I'll look forward to hearing more from those of you doing that work, how you describe it as well.
Yeah, so Jessica, I'm going to turn it over to you to share with us all that good stuff. And go ahead.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction. I'm really excited to be here. I was with you all in the April Movement Cafe doing one of the breakout rooms, and I'm excited that I get to be a part of the main presentation this time around and talking about a ministry that I have been called into, and that so many in our connection has been called to, and something that's very obviously near and dear to my heart. So thank you so much for having me and incorporating camping ministry into the creation justice movement, because being in creation care is a thread throughout all we do in camp and retreat ministries, which I'm going to talk a little bit more as we go on. I do want to start though in prayer, in a time of prayer, and I got this prayer. I'm gonna read it because I thought it was incredibly beautiful, and I didn't want to mess with it. I'm putting a link to it if you are interested in having it for your own use. But please join me as we start and center ourselves for a moment of prayer. God of creation, we thank you today for this beautiful universe. We thank you for giving us a beautiful and habitable planet beaming with life. for the beautiful flora and fauna, the lush green plants, trees, and vegetation, for the millions of wonderful species of animals and insects in their vibrant colors, which are keeping the ecosystem in balance. We thank you for the various landscapes, the mountains, plains, rivers, and vast oceans, for the fresh air to breathe to rejuvenate ourselves, for providing us with food and water and the wide variety of fruits, vegetables, and minerals. We thank you for providing us with our bodies, brains, and the inspiration to use these in a way that serves you, cares for all that you have provided to us, and shows love for others. Amen. I wanted to start in a moment of gratitude because we have been blessed with these incredible spaces. Incredible, all of creation is incredible, but our camp and retreat ministry spaces are unique. And I am so grateful for that we have them as a place as followers to go and to be immersed in creation. So whenever I talk about camping, and today as well in this presentation, I want to talk about it in a couple different ways. I am going to talk about the history of camping, and because this is a United Methodist group, so I can go, United Methodist nerd with it. So I'm going to talk about the history of camping, as well as I'm going to talk about the 7 foundations. These are the things that make United Methodist camping unique. So there are camping experiences, all hundreds and hundreds of camping sites across the country, secular camping sites, faith-based camping sites, some that are focused on particular sports or other, focus areas. And what we do uniquely in United Methodist camping can be seen in the 7 foundations. If one of them isn't present, then it diminishes the experience of a United Methodist camp experience. But what we are essentially is a place of sumatanga. Sumatanga is the name of one of our sites, but it's also a Sanskrit word that they use in the Himalayan mountains, that they use to describe these notches that are cut out in the rock face along a trail. So as a hiker is hiking and on their journey, they can come up to these places of sumatanga, or these little notches on the rock face, and they can set the bottom of their pack on that rock ledge and then duck down, and it temporarily lifts the weight of their pack up off of their shoulders. And so it's in these moments of sumatanga where the traveler can take a rest, take a break, have that weight lifted, that burden lifted, and they can truly focus on where they've been and where they're going to go. And similarly, camp and retreat experiences in these places that we have been blessed with, our campers, our retreat attendees, anybody who comes into a space of our camp and retreat ministries can temporarily lift the burden of their everyday life, lift the weight of society, lift the pack that they're carrying, the baggage that they're carrying, and be in a space where they can find rest and they can reflect on where they've been, and they can shift their focus onto where God is calling them to be. And that's true for everybody that enters into any one of our spaces. So by a show of hands, you can either raise your hand, on the screen, or you can use the little raise the hand button. How many of you have had an experience, have gone to a retreat, been a camper, had a loved one whose life was impacted by a camp or retreat experience? Awesome. That's so many of us. I keep your hand raised, actually, if that experience was whenever you were a child. Yeah, me too. Our campers, especially, I'm going to take a moment to focus on our summer camp experiences. Our campers having the opportunity to be fully immersed in an environment where they are, one-on-one with nature, and fully immersed in creation is so formative. It's something that you can't really get anywhere else. A place where you can reach out and touch God while being surrounded by strong Christian mentors. That's such a formative piece. And it's a formative piece in United Methodism. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to play a portion of a video that was created actually by Lisa Jean, who's on the call with us. So you may recognize her voice.
The camp and retreat experience is woven deeply into the United Methodist tradition. Ponder for a moment the unique identity of the camp or retreat center that holds a special place in your heart. Centuries of both church-related and secular impulses have divinely influenced each of these particularly United Methodist spaces. Let's start back in the 1700s with John Wesley and his strategy of field preaching. Our Wesleyan heritage is rooted in getting outside of the church walls and into creation, caring for one another and for the sacred diversity of the natural world. Layer on top of John Wesley's approach to sharing the gospel, the introduction of camp meetings in the following decades is a uniquely American experience. As the country expanded westward, religious leaders brought families together at tabernacle-centered holy grounds for preaching and worship. In 1811, Methodist Bishop Francis Asbury reported that over 400 camp meetings were held annually along the frontier. The late 1800s also brought about the Methodist-led Chautauqua movement. The Chautauqua experience was an intentional faith community that emphasized the interaction of arts, recreation, and education, first for Sunday school teachers and then for the wider public. It grew from its original location in New York, still in operation, to a nationwide movement. Early Methodist camping boomed through the Epworth League Institutes by the early 1900s. These early summer camps brought together groups of youth from various congregations and offered senior high leadership development for 1 or 2 weeks. In many camp ministries today, you can see a blend of camp meetings, Chautauqua experiences, and Epworth League institutes. In the years after World War II, an emphasis on youth development resulted in many camps being founded. Crystal Springs Camp in Michigan was one of the first Methodist camps, founded in 1860. From that point through the end of the 1940s, roughly 65 Methodist camp centers were established across the United States. Another 34 camp and retreat centers were founded in the post-World War II years. Now let's jump forward to the late 1950s when Lloyd B. Sharp, who was born 1895 and died in 1963, and led a shift in youth camping. Small group rustic camping focused on living together, discovery and reflection, and moved away from centralized events with classes and speakers. It was also during this time that a national organizational structure was formed around denominational camping. The National Council of Churches, a multi-denominational leadership organization, formed the Outdoor and Leisure Ministries Committee. And the Methodist Church created the National Camp and Retreat Committee under the denomination's Board of Discipleship. Following the 1968 merger of the Evangelical United Brethren Church and the Methodist Church, the number of camp and retreat centers in many conferences almost doubled. Mel Moody from the EUB tradition was the first National United Methodist Camp Director. He organized national leadership gatherings just before ACA conferences, so United Methodist camp leaders had a visual impact on the whole camping profession. Bob Cagle, the next national director, led a shift in the leadership styles of many sites. moving us from property caretakers being in charge of everything to specialized, trained camp professionals, director managers, overseeing all aspects of the ministry. This shift also made possible the expansion of female leadership in camp director manager roles for the first time. In the mid-1970s, a dedicated group of volunteers began organizing specialized trainings to support the development of these leaders. The United Methodist National Gathering became a vital part of the camp and retreat ministries throughout the country. This is when camps became more than summer youth programs. With the expansion of a shoulder season, many sites became year-round ministries, inviting all ages into these camp and retreat experiences.
So that's just a portion of the video. I do encourage you to watch the rest of it. It goes on to share about how we develop leaders and how the experiences and programs of camps have developed and shifted over the years, and ends with the formation of our current United Methodist Camp and Retreat Association, which I'm a part of and Jen is a part of on staff, and many on the call are members of and do ministry and volunteer with as well. So I encourage you to watch that, because camping and being outdoors and being in the natural world is such an important part of our history as United Methodists. And I think if we remember that, it can help us drive and be even more inspired to do the work that we're doing around creation care and creation justice. But I'm going to move on because I'm trying to keep on time, because I set this up about our 7 foundations. I'm going to go through each of the 7 foundations to share with you all more about what it is that we do, the unique aspects of camping retreat ministries, what those factors are that give that life-changing experience. So these are the 7 foundations. Okay. So the first one that I want to talk about is providing sacred places apart. So in United Methodist Camping, we offer these holy spaces in nature. These are places that have been set apart to allow our campers and our guests to be removed from the barriers, those things that get in the way from fully being able to see the ever-present love of God. And in today's modern society, we're bombarded with technology and consumerism and expectations. And it's in camping ministry where we are uniquely open to the space, to being physically stepping away from the distractions and being in that intentional place of rest and discipleship growth, sumatanga, like we talked about. So that's providing sacred places apart. In United Methodist Camping, we nurture Christian faith and discipleship. We had a whole movement cafe around discipleship and its connection to creation justice. And camp is giving that time to nurture discipleship. Christian discipleship is a growing trust in God that integrates Christ's teachings in a way of living them out in your everyday life. And in the camp setting for campers, in a retreat setting for campers, it's that place where they can truly practice living those out, and the lessons and practices of love and generosity and empathy that are developed while at camp or while on retreat really become a way of life that they carry with them out into society. The third one is that we extend Christian hospitality and community. At the core of Christian hospitality is a calling to be welcoming to all people and to do all that we can to provide an experience of community that impacts people in positive ways. So camp and retreat centers really are dedicated to being a place of God, a place of radical hospitality that is really a dedication to the love of God lived out. Just as we welcome and care for the needs of our guests in our own homes, camp and retreat leaders really provide attention and care to, all of the campers and retreat guests that come into our spaces. So in these spaces of generous hospitality, people really feel ready to move into a relationship from, stranger or not knowing into a relationship of friendship and relationship with God. It's really that genuine love that draws people together in community, despite their differences, despite disagreements. Welcoming of the stranger is a faith-filled act that expresses God's love. And the loving community developed at camp and on retreat is not only reflected by the staff, but it's also lived out among all of our volunteers, all of our campers, and all of our guests, that we hope is then brought into the broader world, bringing hospitality and community into all of the world. We also have a focus on developing principled spiritual leaders. Leadership is crucial in the future and the present of our church, Methodist denomination, as well as the Big C Church. It's the important act of leadership training includes aspects of personal development for the leader. It includes being able to look at life and applying the faith that's taught in any environment into how that leader is sharing the word of God. Most faith-based camp and retreat centers provide staff and board members and volunteers and participants with ample opportunities to develop as Christian spiritual leaders and develop those skills as leaders for the church. It's a modeling after Jesus. Christ had radical ideas about leadership. From his perspective, the one who leads is not the one who is served, but the one who serves, right? And this type of leadership expression, which we call servant leadership, it's an important part of the leadership development that is shown and nurtured when in a camp and retreat setting. And we can see that in both programs and improvised non-scheduled times during camp. All of it is focused on, developing these young people as leaders. Another thing that makes United Methodist Camping unique is that we partner with United Methodist churches and agencies, and Bob's going to talk a little bit about this here in a little bit, but one of the most fruitful and vital dimensions of United Methodist Camping is our participation in a covenant connection with our local and our global church family. United Methodists deliberately choose to link together. We have that connectionalism. We join forces for a common mission. And our United Methodist Camp and Retreat Ministry leaders and our committees that are guiding our boards are genuinely engaged in the church beyond the boundaries of our Camp and Retreat Center sites. But we partner with other churches and agencies to make a difference in the broader world. One of the other 7 foundations is that we inspire and equip lives for love and justice. The intent of Christian camp and retreat ministries is not to isolate people from real life. So we do provide these sacred places apart. We're having campers and retreat attendees come apart away from society, but it's not to isolate them and make our participants feel as though they're separate from society. But within this ministry setting of camping or being at a retreat center, it's our desire that people find renewal and insight and practices and a new vision for the possibilities of life that find expression whenever they return from the mountaintop experiences, as many people call it. Jesus often took time apart for renewal and communication with God, and spiritual retreats and camp experiences also provide that space apart as a way of rejuvenating to go back into the real world to share the love of God and to seek justice. Micah 6:8 makes it very clear that justice making is an activity of the faithful and not merely a theoretical principle. This call is lived out within camp and retreat settings through education, through motivating people, again, to take it beyond their retreat or beyond their camp experience and out into the real world. And then lastly, one of our 7 foundations is to teach creation care and appreciation. We're going to dive into that a lot here in a moment, but I'm going to introduce Laura just by teeing you up here a little bit and sharing about how it's the tradition from, as you saw in the video, very early Methodist heritage to be out in the open air to share the good news in creation. Creation speaks of the Creator, and it can draw us closer to God, to the giver of life, and encourages us to listen for God in new ways. So I'm going to pass it off to Laura. Each of the folks that are going to be talking are also going to be leading a workshop. So, or not a workshop, a breakout room, excuse me. They're going to be leading a breakout room. So if you want to explore a little bit more with them, there'll be an opportunity for that. So Laura is going to talk to us for a minute about outdoor experiences and spiritual faith development. So Laura, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you. Yeah. Excited to talk about this. And I want to preface it by first starting that you don't have to be in like a wilderness setting to have an experience of creation or a spiritual experience. I live in a more urban area now, and I definitely get my doses of nature and my connection with God through that. But there is something to be said for the immersive nature that you can have in a camp or retreat setting, in those places, as Jessica mentioned, that have been kind of set apart, whether you're there for a day retreat or maybe you're there for a weekend, or even some of our campers who are there for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or even 4 weeks. I think that this opportunity to be, as Jessica mentioned, in a place apart and away from our ordinary lives in these beautiful settings. So many of our camp and retreat centers are just in these incredibly beautiful natural settings. And I think we're starting to learn like how important it is as humans for us to be in these natural areas. Like if you've heard about like forest bathing, or like there's so many other things that are starting to like use science to show some of the things that many of us have probably experienced about how nature can be healing and can lead us into to be deeper into our spirits and a greater connection with God. I'll say nature is more than just a background setting for our experiences in nature. I was thinking about this. So previous to working here at a church, I was at Donley for 8 years, and we did a lot of worship out there too. And to hear a worship song that talked about being on a river when you're standing there right next to a river, it's different. And I started to consider like how many hymns or worship songs talk about a natural feature, whether it's a river or an ocean or, the rolling plains. And then how many of our hymns or worship songs talk about an urban setting? Very few talk about an urban setting, but so many of them make that connection between our faith, between our experiences of God in a natural setting. And so when we have the opportunities to be in those natural settings, even when we leave, we can make that connection and be like, oh yes, I remember that. And I noticed how many things that our campers particularly got to experience in being at camp, being away from their like suburban or urban lives, that help them connect with the biblical witness that they wouldn't have gotten to in their ordinary lives. Don Lee does a lot of sailing specifically. And, you know, we do all we can to keep campers safe, but sometimes storms come up, like we cannot control that. And once a camper has had an experience of a storm, like a actual literal storm, it can help them understand, you know, what Paul might have been experiencing after the storm he experienced in the story, and the shipwreck that he experienced. It helps them connect their own personal lives with the biblical witness. And so, and it's not just sailing. You know, we've got our disciples of Jesus who were fishermen. Once they've been fishing, they can start to grasp concepts and kind of open up their understanding through things that they might not have gotten if they just read the Bible sitting in their Sunday school class at church. So much of what Jesus talked about was from his experience and the experience of people who followed him, which was things in nature, whether it was wheat and seeds or sheep or birds. And so when we have those experiences, that helps us connect more deeply to God through that. And then I also notice how much in camp and retreat centers, that discipleship piece, finding that care for creation, and being exposed to an environmental ethic that they might not have gotten exposed to in their family of origin, seeing how you can live out a care for creation. Some of our sites are environmental education centers where schools come for the day or overnight and learn about the environment, to see how people are caring for the environment. And even places that work with churches, folks may never have been around people who care and are paying attention to some of these things, and just kind of exposure to that. So those are some of the ways that I have glimpsed it, and I've just been incredibly blessed to be a part of some of these camper retreat centers.
Thank you, Laura. So we talked about the history of camping. We talked about the philosophy of camping, the theology of camping. So what are our camp and retreat centers actually doing now around creation justice? So we're gonna talk a little bit about that, and I'm gonna in a moment invite Lawrence to share, and then Jen Birch to share. But just as for scope, we have 179-ish camp and retreat centers across the country in every annual conference. And many of these camp and retreat centers have intentional environmental education programming as part of them. I'm thinking of, Don Lee and Magruder and Rolling Ridge and Mechuana and Glisten and everywhere in between. We have environmental education programs as part of our ministry in the majority of our camp and retreat centers. And our camp and retreat centers are also moving towards other projects like installing solar panels, energy efficiency, natural habitat creation, and other various ways of stewarding these holy spaces that God has given to us in a way that shows creation justice and creation care. So Lawrence, I invite you to take a couple minutes and share what's happening at Rolling Ridge, as well as what you want to talk about around eco-spiritual programming.
Great. Thanks, Jessica. And so just to kind of give you a little bit of backstory, Rolling Ridge is one of 4 camping and retreat ministry sites here in the New England Annual Conference. Rolling Ridge is located in North Andover, Massachusetts, and we've got 3 other sites, which we consider camping sites. Rolling Ridge is a little different in the sense that we are a retreat ministry. And oftentimes when it comes to this idea of camping and retreat ministries, people forget that oftentimes that there is camping for kids, but then there's also a retreat ministry element, because all the 7 principles that Jessica talked about don't just stop when all of a sudden you're no longer able to go to camp or you're not able to volunteer anymore. Because this idea of environmental education, of connecting with creation, is not just something that happens when you're a kid, but it happens throughout all of our lives. And as we continue to go back to these outdoor spaces, whether in camping or in retreat ministries, which are also surrounded by beautiful environments, there's an opportunity for us to continue to go back year after year after year. I know that I was involved with camping ministry when I was a child and a youth back in California. You would squish 7 people, 8 people into bunk houses. But it reaches a certain point where bunk beds no longer work for you anymore. And feeling comfortable in a room with 8 other people is not necessarily the most conducive way to be able to grow into your spirituality. And that's where I think retreat ministries, similar to what Rolling Ridge is able to do, is to continue this opportunity for all ages to be able to connect with creation. Rolling Ridge consists of 38 acres on Lake Cochicowit here in North Andover, which is just about 35 miles north of Boston. We're kind of in a slightly urban hub that's slightly suburban, that's slightly urban in the sense that we are right on the lake. And we have an opportunity to be able to bring in people from around the greater Boston area into these retreat spaces. Our facility was a summer home that was converted to retreat use back in 1948. And so this year we're celebrating 75 years of ministry within the United Methodist world, or within Methodism. But as Jessica was talking about some of the things that Rolling Ridge is able to do, just to give a little bit of backstory, I did my doctoral work in eco-spirituality, recognizing that our connection with creation allows us to connect with the Creator. And I began to look at spiritual practices to be able to help us use nature, not just a backdrop for these spiritual programs, but to be able to use nature to be able to connect in with those deeper spaces. Some of you might be familiar, for example, with spiritual practices like Lectio Divina, which is divine reading, using text to be able to bring us into those spiritual spaces, connecting with God. In many ways, what eco-spirituality is about, it's about using nature within a Lectio format to be able to read nature, which is the first revelation of God, and be able to allow that revelation of God to be able to bring us into those deeper spaces with our Creator and our connection with Creator. One of the first programs that we launched here at Rolling Ridge when I started about 6 years ago was a program that was called Worship in the Woods. We've got our lakeside. We've got a Point of Pines outdoor chapel right on the lake, and we use that space for nature contemplation, primarily with adults, teaching them about how nature can be a space to be able to hear the sermon preached through nature. It's not oftentimes we are so used to going to church settings where we are hearing someone speak at us. Nature contemplation through Worship in the Woods allows nature to be able to give the message, and it gives people that spiritual practice to listen in to what creation is calling us, how we are being called to make change in our own lives, or how we are connecting with creation. Worship in the Wood is one of the eco-spiritual programs that we offer here. We also do another program that's called Pray and Paddle, where we bring adults out onto Lake Cochicowit, and through a Lectio process, we are able to use a passage of scripture or reading. We have it read, and then people paddle to another site where the passage is read again. They paddle to another part of the lake. They have the passage read again, and then they come back to our island, which is right off of our Rolling Ridge Peninsula, and they have an opportunity to reflect about how the paddling, how the experience connecting with nature, how the simply allowing the paddling as a prayer to be able to lead us into those divine spaces. Thanks to a grant last year from the National United Methodist Camping and Retreat Retreat Ministry, we were able to launch Pray and Paddle and to upgrade our equipment. Along with that money, we also launched what we called conscious composting, recognizing there's a spirituality to composting as well. And so we're very thankful for the partnership that that Jessica was able to do in providing funds to be able to help us launch what we called phase 1 of our eco-spiritual programming here. We've just received another $15,000 to be able to help us launch phase 2, which is focusing in on environmental education for adults. It's having a naturalist on site who's going to be able to help educate our adults in some of these different things, all the various ecosystems that make up our Rolling Ridge property. Lakefront, we've got woods, we've got an organic farm, we have a composting area, we also have we also have wetlands as well as a vernal pool. All these things that adults come to Rolling Ridge and say, it's like, do you know about da, 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 da? We're moving toward providing environmental education for adults while also partnering with other eco-spiritual partners in regards in terms of environmental education for all ages. And so when it comes to this idea of eco-spirituality, I really believe that eco-spirituality helps us connect with creation so that we can do the next step of the work, which is to live into eco-justice. Oftentimes, we work with environmental activists who are so much on the front lines working for creation care issues that they oftentimes forget to care for their own spirits. Eco-spirituality is developing those spiritual practices so that we can care for ourselves, so that we can then be on the front line of creation justice in the larger world within our churches. And so there's a lot more that I could talk about in regards to some of the eco-programming that we're doing at Rolling Ridge, as well as some of the things that are going on within our camping and retreat ministries. But you'll need to come to the breakout room for more of those conversations. And so I pass it back to Jessica to take us to the next layer of our conversation this afternoon.
Thank you, Lawrence. I really appreciate that. And I'm going to quickly hop it over to Jen and invite her to share a little bit about kind of what's next, what's in the works around our overall connection in camping around creation care.
Thank you. Well, we know that our 179 United Methodist Camp and Retreat Ministries across the U.S. are stewarding vast amounts of gorgeous property and many commercial buildings that use a lot of energy. And at the same time, sort of as Laura and Lawrence and others have talked about, because of our connection to our Christian tradition and our camps and retreat centers' missional commitments to faith formation and education, we have special opportunities to help people make those connections between their experiences with us and ways to live faithfully within God's creation more broadly. So we are at the very beginning of helping camp and retreat ministries to benchmark our energy use and begin to use hard data to guide our creation care initiatives. This aligns with our own missions of our individual centers and UMCRM's 7 foundations that Jessica introduced us to. And eventually, we hope that they will help us to do our part towards the United Methodist Church's net zero carbon emissions goals for 2050 as well. So I want to share a couple of free practical resources from the Federal Environmental Protection Agency that are available to help give shape to our creation care initiatives at our camp and retreat ministry sites. And we'll talk in more detail if you come to my breakout time. But the first is really that the data are telling us that most commercial buildings can cut energy use 20 to 30% with no cost action, strategic investment in things like LED bulbs and power and water saving appliances, for example, and then also maintenance like sealing cracks and fixing leaks and sort of low-hanging fruit like that. And we have some partners in the EPA's Energy Star Congregations team who are working on a treasure hunt green assessment tool specifically for camp and retreat ministries to provide checklists for our local green teams or trustees to do assessments of our sites and discover the easiest ways to lower our carbon footprint and save energy and money. I hear that we should have a draft of that resource by the end of this month. So if you're interested in helping to review that first draft of the treasure map resource, just email me and let me know, or drop me something in the chat, and we'd be happy to include you in that review process. And then there's the free online tool called Energy Star Portfolio Manager, which may be familiar to some of you. Paid for by our federal dollars, so free to us. It's a wonderful way to benchmark energy usage on a site and kind of track data so that you can look at your own changes over time. So if we changed out the boiler, let's see how that made a difference in our energy use. Or what would it mean if we switched to LED bulbs in these buildings? How would that impact our electricity? So all of those data points to both help us track internally and make decisions, but then also to compare our data with similar buildings and similar geographic and climate regions so that we can continue to do better. There's a way to earn Energy Star certification, but even if we don't meet those like big goals of getting our Energy Star, even just moving, if we started a very low, what they call EUI rating, just if we're able to move a few percentage points, if we're able to do gradual improvements, we're doing our faithful part to live as we're called to live as stewards of creation. So the idea is that knowing better and doing better is our own act of faithfulness to our call as stewards of creation and to the resources that are entrusted to us. So we can talk more in detail about those couple resources, and I'll put a little link in the chat to a document that's got some more access to the EPA stuff, even if you don't come to my breakout, so that you can check that out in more detail.
Thank you. I'm really excited about seeing how this unfolds in the coming months and years, and how all of our camp and retreat centers can have a part in decreasing their carbon footprint through portfolio manager and Energy Star Guide and that sort of thing. So it's a really exciting initiative that's being moved forward. So thank you for sharing that with us, Jen. So we've talked a lot about what the camps are doing and the philosophy of camping, but one of those 7 foundations was partnering with local churches and agencies. So Bob Downs is with us, and there are a vast number of ways that you as a local church leader can be involved in the camping and retreat program, not just as a participant, but as a leader and as a driver of initiatives and ideas and ways of utilizing the ministry in your local area. So Bob, I want to invite you to talk about some partnerships between camps and local churches as well as other ways through United Methodist Creation Justice Movement to be a part of camping ministries.
Sure. Thanks, Jessica. Actually, some of this conversation started about 2 or 3 weeks ago when, as a result of Jen's a question Jen asked about portfolio manager and Energy Star certification related to camp ministries. We gathered a number of people, some of whom are here today. Actually, most of them are here today to look at the connections and where we might have some partnerships. A lot of our churches, and as Jen pointed out, there is a wonderful workbook that EPA put out. It's co-branded by GBGM or UWF, depending on which version you wish to get. Co-branding means we get a page of propaganda on the first page of the book. The rest of the book is good, solid information about how to use and how to go about greening your church and greening your congregation. And it really is a wonderful document, and any of the versions will give you the same basic information. The first page just kind of tells you about how the co-branding organization is interested and concerned about environmental stewardship. But what we talked about specifically was how does that apply to to the camps, and that's a unique application, which is probably more akin to kind of a school campus application, because camps typically have a variety of buildings spread around across at least a limited geographical area, most of which are probably not the best insulated buildings in the world. So that alone is going to be an interesting application. I say that only as it generated a little further discussion about what Jessica was saying, is the cooperation and the opportunities for our churches and our camps and really outdoor ministry in general to work together. And one of the real questions that came out of that is whether or not, as part of the UC, United Methodist Creation Justice Movement, excuse me, we need a separate working group to look at that. And I will make a comment about it at the very end. But basically, we looked at a variety of things. Camps provide a great opportunity for not only our youth, but also our adults to get out into nature. During the summer, we tend to think of them as being dedicated to camp programs during the week for youth. But weekends are a great opportunity for churches to use camp centers, excuse me, to not only have workshops in a variety of areas, but also to get their congregations out into nature. I shared when we talked about a program that my church did for years when I was growing up. On Labor Day weekend, we took over our church camp and took about 40 or 50 families who used those cabins with the bunk beds anyhow. And we really had a wonderful time getting out into nature, having worship in nature, doing some camps and crafts and what have you, and just generally having a great fellowship time. So, those are the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about as we look at utilization of camps. And I know all conferences are probably wrestling with the issues of camp costs and possibly reducing. I know my own conference is looking at reducing camp from 3 to 1 because of funding issues and to a degree the use. So we looked at a variety of opportunities, not only for using the camps in terms of ministry, but also ways that we can help with the camps. One of the things we talked about is most conferences have emergency response teams. And those teams go all over the place as a result of various disasters and what have you. But those teams also need an opportunity to train. And we've engaged our local team with the idea of why not go to either small churches that need help with some of their insulation and some of those kind of things, or to our camps. And do your engagement on some of the buildings that need upkeep and some of the buildings that need work done. You do two things. You improve the camp, and you also train your people so that when the disasters come, they know how to work together and respond. We talked about the idea that getting into nature isn't necessarily just restricted to camp ministry. There's a variety of ministries wild church ministries, taking advantage of natural areas that may or may not be camp related, but getting their congregations, again, out into nature, sharing the idea of either opening with the Roman Catholic community has a tradition of opening the book of nature, which is the idea that God reveals God's self through nature and through scripture. Doing the kinds of things that we were talking about just a few minutes ago with the paddling ministry that Lawrence talked about. That's the kind of thing that you can do at a camp, but you can also do it, more locally if you need to. One of the things that I think came out of our discussions, and I will let Kathy and Rashinda tell me if this is wrong, but in our discussions on Monday, we had a meeting of the workshop, which is an annual conference workshop. And we kind of came to the conclusion that we really think camp ministry and outdoor ministry is probably unique enough to warrant a working group of its own. And maybe look at just how broad that application would be. I would suggest that it would look at camps, but also at other applications of ministry in nature, be it in your own church, having an outdoor service, to going somewheres that is nature related and taking advantage of that. By the way, I'll quickly say I am not sitting in front of the mountains behind me. Those are just to block the mess that's in the room that I'm sitting in. So I don't want people to get a wrong idea. Though I would love to be there, but that's another issue. Anyhow, so that's something that I think if there are people that are interested in that kind of a working group, I would invite you to either meet in our breakout session or send an email to us that you're interested in following up on that, because I think there's some great opportunity. But again, it's a matter of people and interest and how do we go forward. And some of the things that the other speakers have talked about are all areas that we could apply that to. So.
Yeah,
okay.
We're just about to turn over to our breakout groups, but I want to give Jessica a couple minutes to sort of wrap up this piece. Anything that you wanted to make sure that kind of gotten buttoned up or sort of brought round?
Sure. I hope that through this presentation, you have been able to visualize and see the thread of creation care and creation justice through the entire history of United Methodist Camping, including what we're doing today and what we're hoping to move into the future, and that you're inspired to be a part of what we're doing as we move forward as a ministry, in partnership and collaboration with local church ministry and conference ministry. So the various areas, I know Roshinda is going to be introducing them, but the various areas that we talked about, if you're interested in exploring more, I encourage you to join a breakout room, but I'm happy to answer any questions if there's any at this point.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So the next piece is a breakout room. So you get a chance to ask questions, to have conversations with folks that you can share the room with. I would really encourage you to be brave if you're usually one who kind of goes, well, I'm done now, to hang in there with the breakout room. There are some marvelous conversations here, and you really do get a chance to hear about things a little bit more in depth. And as proof of that, whenever I end the breakout room, people always reluctantly come back into the main area. And so you know it's been a great conversation. So I'm going to open the breakout rooms. And our process here is you'll see that there's different options you can choose from, listed by the name of the presenter and the basic subject that they're going to be talking more about. And all you have to do is press that little blue join button, and it will put you in the room with the person that you would love to have a little bit more conversation with or learn more from. Then we'll come back and we'll share a little bit of our gleanings, our good gleanings, and then get some links and more information, because you're going to want to know what to follow up and how to do that, and a prayer. And we will head on our way. So I invite you now to click on those join links. I see a lot of smiles, so I'm going to say that probably went well. We only have a couple minutes for wrap up, but I think is there maybe one lucky person or someone bursting who just wants to just say how that went? How'd that go for you?
Well, there's a question I didn't get to ask in our annual conference group with Bob. Is there anybody here who has successfully formed a 501c3 corporation to take on ownership of a camp as a nonprofit, especially when a conference is planning to sell a camp? Or if there's another alternative where a group of committed camp volunteers and ministers could run the camp themselves?
I would say that's probably too big of a question to answer in the few minutes we have left, but we have our good trusty chat. And I don't know if anyone could reply to Jenna in chat and or send her information, who she can contact so that that question can get answered, because that is a really good question.
Yeah, Janet, why don't you email me directly? We have sites that have had that happen, and we have resources that I can send to you, so we can get you the information you need for that.
And thanks, Jessica. I also threw my email in chat if anybody has other information they can pass on. And thanks in advance.
And one
awesome.
quick thing I would recommend, we could check with within our own conference, the folks down in near Portsmouth, if you remember just a few years ago, absorbed one of the camps that we were getting rid of. They might have some experience in that also.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so I want to turn it quickly over to Kathy and Jessica to give us those last links and bits of information, and then Jay will Lawrence J will be praying us out. There he is. Will be praying us out. So go ahead, Jessica and Kathy.
I'm going to just go quickly. I don't, the one thing I wanted to share is that I think there might be two groups forming here. One that is focused on the kind of practical EPA, Energy Star, really how do you green your building and facilities of a camp. And that group hopefully can form, and as Bob talked about, in our group, we also talked about one that is focused kind of on camping and eco spirituality and kind of the wild church movement and spirituality in nature. And so they're both related and connected, and could be fruitful spaces separately. So if you're interested in either or both of those, feel free to reach out to me or Bob, and we'll get you hooked up.
I'm just going to put two links into the chat. The first one is if you want to know where your local camp is, or if you're traveling across the states and want to know where a camp is, we have a map that plots out all of our camp and retreat centers in our United Methodist Connection. And then if you want to learn more about the 7 foundations, there's a document there that you can explore more about the 7 foundations of United Methodist camping.
Along the lines of what Kathy just said, I'm going to pop a link in here. This is my own Substack. It's a presentation I did that talks about the IRA funding from a faith community context. And although I didn't offer that presentation with Camp and Retreat particularly, there's a lot of information about partnerships and regional resources and funding that is going to be coming down the pike. So just to put there, and I see Kathy has got the newsletter. So if you're not getting the newsletter, I really suggest that you do that. There's lots of information, action items, articles, opportunities to onboard and do really get more involved, or just learn what other folks are doing so that you can network in the United Methodist Creation Justice effort, which is just absolutely marvelous at this point with so many people engaged. Jessica, do you have any last minute thing before we do our final prayer?
Thank you for having me here. And I appreciate all the work that you're doing as the Creation Justice Movement. And I am really looking forward to how we can continue to work together and partner in the future.
Oh, amen and amen. Go ahead, Kathy.
And our June Café, which will be on June 21st, will be featuring additional net zero conversations. We'll be talking with Jenny Phillips and Jake Barnett, who are both leading the interagency net zero coalition of our boards and agencies, the United Methodist Church, but also deepening that to look at how we all in our spaces can look at lowering our carbon footprint. So we'll carry that conversation forward next month.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kathy. Okay, so Lawrence, I want to turn it over to you. I want to bless and thank everybody. And we do that so wonderfully in prayer. So go ahead, Lawrence.
And so I like to do things differently. We do that a lot of different things at Rolling Ridge. And so you might know that the word eco, or the prefix eco, comes from the Greek word oikos, which means community. It means connected. It means it reflects the fact that we are all kin together. And so eco-spirituality is really oikos spirituality, or it's really a spirituality of connecting, a spirituality of community, a spirituality of being one together. And so rather than closing our eyes, I'm going to invite you to keep your eyes open and looking at this beautiful community, this beautiful ecosystem that makes up the Creation Justice Network, as well as those of us involved with Camping and Retreat Ministries. And so with your eyes embracing all these beautiful faces that are part of our oikos, of our eco, may we pray together. O Spirit that connects all of us in a universe that is ever expanding, may your love continue to expand, may the ideas continue to expand, and may the greening continue to expand as we lean into the connections that make up who we are as United Methodists. May you continue to strengthen us in the good work of going forward with creation justice. May you also continue to allow us to go deeper in the spiritual practices that ground us in who we are in you. And may we go forth in the divine Trinitarian love that enfolds us, that we call Creator, Christ, and Connector. Go in peace. Amen and amen. Thanks, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Amen and amen.